Sounds good.
Welcome, SciCommers, to our August mentor chat. In the last couple of mentor chats, we've been focusing on the theme of priming for communication. We started in July with the community chat sharing how we prepare for communicating to various audiences. This month, we will move the conversation to the many options and opportunities in the ever-growing science communication and civic science landscape. And then we'll round out the theme in September with a conversation on strategic communication. And so we hope to see you all there, and thank you for joining us today. Our guest for today is Fanuel Muindi. He's a former neuroscientist turned civic science scholar, journalist, and entrepreneur. He is the founder and chief resident of the Sai Resident Collective, a nonprofit incubator that funds emerging civic science entrepreneurs to launch new ventures that connect science to society. Within the collective, Fanuel leads the Civic Science Media Lab, which conducts investigative civic science journalism to interrogate and unravel ongoing progress and shed light on important issues across the field. Fanuel, the floor is yours. And SciCommers, if you have any questions or comments throughout our mentor chat, please feel free to add them into the chat bar on Zoom.
Great. Thank you for the invite. It's always great to, I see a lot of familiar faces as well here. So I hope this, I was told this is super informal, but I ended up creating slides anyway. I'll go through those slides, some of them very, very quickly, but I want to get to the conversation part because that's where I have the most fun when people ask me questions and I have to think about things that I haven't thought about. So, okay, let me just share with you some of these slides. All right. All right, tell me, Tyler, if this works. Is it all visual? Okay, great. And I'm gonna time here, just make sure I don't go over too much. So what I decided to do today was to just tell you about this thing that I've been doing called civic science journalism and frame it around this as a practice insight. So you just have this in the back of your pockets as you go about your work as SciCommers and so forth. As you heard, so I am at Northeastern, professor of practice, founder and director of the Civic Science Media Lab, and I'm also a senior fellow for Civic Science and Research America, and that will come up a little bit later. So I wanted to show you this video. So this is me actually at Northeastern. One of my colleagues' spaces, Eileen McGivney, and she was giving me a tour of our VR lab. And so we have a VR lab at Northeastern. Students come in here and build all these really cool visuals and so forth. But we were talking about public engagement, science communication with VR, XR, and all these things. And I'm showing you this because it captures sort of what I love doing the most is to be out in the field and understanding what's going on, as what are people doing, what are people thinking about. And had a fascinating conversation with Eileen, who was a researcher as well, looking at the usage of VR and XR in public engagement and what she's learning from that space. And so I just thought this was just so cool because it captured, you forget everything that this is a lot of fun to do. And it's just been very illuminating. And in this presentation, I'm going to tell you some of what I've been seeing on the ground with a lot of help that I've had along the way. And this is my visual. I've tried to put this on paper as to what I see and what it keeps me going. That video there, if I had to like put it into this map, it will be a tiny little bimpy dot, right, of all the work that people are doing, all of you that are doing, right? Whether it's the funding landscape, the training landscape, which I'll talk about, the people that are in here as well, and what they're learning, the knowledge they're gaining, who they're connecting about, what their journeys, the centers that are coming up online. And just for me, I look at the connections that brings us all together, right, in doing this work. A lot of walls all over the place, I'll tell you right now, so many walls where there's terminology, which I'll quickly touch upon. But there's so much opportunity and potential that as a former neuroscientist, I know all I think about our connections, right? So, and this is, if you take that map and actually put it into a real domain, this is what it potentially could look like. So this is like the funders, the training programs, the all the stuff that people are doing, and it's like all together all the time, everywhere, right? The conferences that are taking place, which actually are not in here, by the way, I should add those too, but it's a big hot mess, right? And as practitioners or scholars, you have to navigate this space, right? You and I have to navigate this space, and you have to do it in almost real time. And it's really, really challenging, right? Because things are changing on the go, right? New papers to read. You want to talk to people as well, because people are learning things on the ground, and guess what? They're not publishing them either or telling anyone unless someone asks them, right? So there's a lot of challenges, right, in this space where you're trying to always be ahead in terms of having that situational awareness to be able to make informed decisions about what questions you pursue, what initiative do you design, right? Who do you reach out to? And so this brings me up to the question that my lab investigates at the core is this covering the civic nature of science, right? And what is that? The new knowledge, lived experiences, the activities, the behaviors, the roles, what motivates people, and the responsibilities of the individuals that are running and studying this landscape and doing the activities, which I'll talk more about. And so my lab, I've just been very fortunate to have developed this space from my postdoc at MIT, and it's just been growing ever since, where we've been mapping the different components, trying to ask different questions and trying to make sense of what this thing is. As a postdoc, I didn't really know much about civic science, yet alone science communication and all these things. And so I wanted to create a space where people can start asking these questions. And so the lab has grown out of that. And as you heard from Tyler, the Sai Resident Collective actually was born out of this activity, from doing this work and realizing actually we need to be also directly supporting these emerging investigators and practitioners in this space. And so what it came down to really were the people that have come to the lab. And I wanted to just bring this up very quickly because it wouldn't be as much fun without them. I believe Jake is on the line as well. He's one of my lab members right now. So Jake, thank you so much for all you've been doing. And I should add your photo. This is an old photo. Fellows, interns that have come along the way who, driven by the curiosity about what is going on in the landscape. And so I always tell them, pursue that curiosity and let us learn something new about what's going on here in the US and around the world. And of course, I've been blessed to have the support of all these organizations along the way. It's getting grants to develop new training programs and covering different series, which if I have time at the end, I'll tell you about. But this wouldn't be possible without the support of all these places, organizations, and people that have said yes to some of my crazy ideas in terms of mapping this landscape. So civic science, I hope you're probably wondering, okay, Fanuel, I hope you tell us what civic science is. Okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that, right? At least I'm going to attempt to do that, right? How I think about civic science, there are various, if you talk to different people, they may describe it slightly differently. I like the Rita Allen Foundation framing, using this umbrella term of all these areas that have components that are connected together, right, towards this term called civic science, whether it's public engagement, science policy, science communication. It attempts to break down these walls that we naturally put up to say, okay, you are doing science communication, you're doing public engagement and so forth, or community science, or as is known nowadays, participatory science, right, versus citizen science. You see all these things come up and the walls are there. And so civic science attempts to say, hey, we're all together in this endeavor, right? And so whether you look at it from this dimension, some of you may have this terminology in mind, right? The informal science education, the ISE, that is the NSF's version of thinking about this. And there was a really nice paper, and I'll share the links, Tyler, later in the chat. I have a Word doc. I'll just copy and paste all the links so you guys can read them. But this comes from the Public Face of Science in America, a really nice visual where they try to just show the intersection between them. They go through the different terminologies, and I just love this way you're looking at the commonality, right? Science communication, the exchange of information, pursuing opportunities for lifelong learning, right? Informal science, and then the intentional mutual learning. Notice that we're all talking about the same thing in just like different terminologies, right? Of course, these are well-developed fields and people have articulated differences and so forth, and there are important differences, but I think the similarities are important to not overlook. This study here has a nice visual as well for you to take a look at later, which has this ISC and SciComm, and kind of this bubbling in terms of actions and practitioners, what they're doing. And this is a really great diagram. And I saw Bruce Lewinstein showcase this in one of his presentations, which I thought was really cool. And so all to say that there's a lot of overlap, a lot of overlap. And then that for me makes it exciting, because I go and, when I go to talk to someone on the ground, I get to hear how they are framing things and looking at those connections, saying, oh, actually, you're doing this too. Cool. What are you learning from that work, right? So the civic science imperative has a nice definition as well of civic science. It's broad public engagement with issues that arise at the many intersections between science and society. And in this civic science roadmap that came out recently as well, they talk about the civic science professionals, right, being dedicated to listening and co-creating, grounded in commitment to broadening who informs research, who participates in research, who decides about its use and applications, and who benefits from its power and from its a really good read in terms of if you want to understand how the civic science framing, especially from practitioners and scholars in the space. So best to hear directly from one of these scholars or practitioners on the ground. And so I hope, actually, Tyler, let me just disable my share screen for a second, because I forgot to share the audio. And so I'm going to reshare, and hopefully the audio will come through as well. Share sound. Yes. Okay. Let's see if that works. So this is Marina Joubert. Some of you may know. She's a professor of science communication at Stellenbosch University. Have a listen.
Civic science comes to life when scientists emerge from their labs and offices to engage with public audiences in dialogue about their work. It requires intentional activities. It doesn't happen by itself. You want to take your research and your knowledge into the public arena, and you want to listen to, but also learn from diverse public audiences. It is therefore about being willing to share your research, but also about being willing to listen to public audiences and giving them a voice. It is about knowing when to keep quiet and to listen to what people have to say. It's about respecting the values and ideas that you can gain from the public, and a desire to understand why they feel a specific way about issues rooted in science and how they form those opinions. Scientists who walk this path are usually surprised by how they enjoy the public dialogue and the feedback they get from the public, and how this feedback can actually enrich their research.
And notice you can replace civic science with science communication, public engagement. It would almost come to the same thing, right? I just love that when that happens. Peter Levine at Tufts, if you talk to him, he would say civic science for him, what should we do? That's the key question. And when he thinks about civic science, what should we do, right? And in this visual that I created here, the action part of this, kind of like what are the challenges we're talking about, because that's another way to think of this, whether it's broadening participation, transparency, science literacy, lifelong learning, right? AI, which I was recently in Notre Dame talking about AI, community engagement, misinformation. That's another way to think of this too, that there are these challenges out there in society. And so we have these different approaches within civic science, right? Science communication, public engagement, that people are using, right? The tools to try to tackle all these challenges that are in place, right? So in that way, in that framing, it unites us to say, oh, what tool are you using, right? To tackle X, Y, and Z. And so civic science is this nice, wonderful tent that we all can sit in and have fun and dance together and try to solve these challenges. But of course, civic science is so much happening, and it's happening at a terminal speed, right? Every day there's something new. People are learning things. And so that's what, for me, with the civic science journalism, the practice has just really, I've tried to embrace this idea that I think we need to use journalism as a vehicle potentially to try to cover these developments in real time almost, if possible. So I wrote this piece, and I'll share the link at the end, where I argued that it's in time for civic science journalism imperative. And it's this really small intersection, right, I see between journalism, science, and civic life, that, then you get the civic science journalism that is in the middle there, which tries to connect and bridge the gaps between research and practice in this space, right? So in figure A, it's this Venn diagram that puts civic science journalism right there in the center. It is, of course, related to, but somewhat focused, more focused than science journalism. But in panel B, what it tries to do is really hone in on this divide between research and practice, right? And so how do you do that? How do you talk to people? Very simple. You talk to people. And that was the realization that I had on the ground, is that we need to be talking to individuals about the work, and we need to be capturing what they're learning. And that was the key insight. It's capturing what they're learning. When you talk to someone who's published a paper, you end up finding out, my goodness, there's so much more to it than what's written in there, right? And so that was the opportunity that I realized, oh my goodness, let's capture this and create. So I'm running a little bit behind, but I'm going to skip a few things here. So there's lots to talk about, and if we had more time, I would have told you all these different projects. But I want to tell you about two of them, two or three, very briefly, and then I hope we can just get into a conversation. So when I got the email from Tyler, I believe it was you, right? Training was what actually you led off with in the email. We were talking, say, hey, you're doing this landscape about training. Can you tell us more? So I'll do that, okay? But this was a project that I've been working on for about a year and a half now, and is funded through the Lasker Foundation and Research America. And it was very opportunity when I saw the opportunity to do this work through Research America, that I had gotten the grant from the Lasker Foundation. And I had been thinking about this too, thinking about a training landscape. And so we partnered up with, I partnered up with Jenny Leray, and it's just amazing to have seen this project grow, develop a dashboard, and then a report that kind of hopefully gets us all thinking, and more people looking at this landscape, right, as an organism that is growing. So you can take a look at this. The report is publicly available, along with the dashboard that I'll tell you briefly about. So if the image I showed you about earlier, so if you remove all the other noise and you just look at the training, this is what you would see. It's a lot of different activities that are taking place. BU has a few as well, and Northeastern has a few, and there's a lot of other stuff that's popping up left and right. And so we try to make sense of what's going on in the field. It was a lot of work trying to categorize these projects, initiatives, on terms of who they're targeting, what field, and what is the content itself that is being shared in these initiatives, type of initiatives, fellowship, courses, workshops. There's just so much that was there, and was ambitious. I have to say that I was like, my God, this is a lot to try and do. So we focused only on the US and utilized the terms public engagement. The focus was public engagement training. And so that helped us be a little bit more contained. So we didn't lose our mind, because there's a lot that you can capture. So compilation, categorization, and then the insight I had towards the end of that project was, ooh, it would be cool if we can visualize this. Up to that point, there had been some publications around the landscape, but really no good way to filter and visualize, right? To be able to sort and visualize the different components. So I attempted that, and yeah, it kind of worked. And so very briefly, there's about 300, 350, 400 initiatives right now that you can go on the dashboard and filter across different segments: science communication, science policy, and others. Over 200 organizations, a lot of universities, as you can imagine, that are listed here. But you see societies as well, for-profits that are listed. Please do mind that actually we didn't map private, like individuals that are hosting trainings, just because of capacity. There's a lot of them that, of course, are available, but we focus quite heavily on the universities and societies that we're providing these trainings. What are they? They're courses, they're fellowships, there's some workshops in here as well that are there. There's certificate programs that are popping up. We are thinking at Northeastern of developing one as well, and there's many others that are considering the same thing as well. So it's just a really nice way, again, to try to parse out the different components, and a lot of hybrid virtual programming that is available through these initiatives. And funny thing here to notice is that when you look at duration, you map this out and you see a lot of them that are in the brief domain, and all of you can guess what those are. There's a lot of workshops, right? That they come and go and you're done, right? And as you go through the duration, the longer it gets, you get another peak here around 52 weeks. And you're probably guessing, hopefully you can guess what that is. Those are the certificate programs that are there, right? So lots of them. So it tend to be about a year. And then as you extend it, there are a couple of PhD programs that are there as well. So University of Wisconsin, Madison has a PhD program, for example, in science communication that is there, right? So this was just really cool to see in this way. And who are they targeting? Everybody, which was really, really interesting to see. The terminology being used was just diverse, and it was really, really hard to try and parse out what, who's your audience exactly again. And that's something that, and I'll tell you how I'm following up on this project. In reading the publicly available websites, this is how it was done. Publicly available websites, it was really hard to parse out who the target audiences were for many of these initiatives. And so if I'm having that trouble, you can imagine those who are looking for these trainings, some of you are looking for those trainings as well, that can be hard to do. And let me show you an example, right? So these are two descriptions of projects initiatives that utilize this terminology where you're like, who is it again? So researchers from all career stages are welcome to apply, where graduate students must certify that they have advanced to PhD candidacy at the time of application. Another one, we're seeking early career scientists, very common and term that people love to use, early career scientists. Engineers and medical professionals and or late stage graduate students with a strong interest in science and technology policy work, right? And some versions of this were utilized across initiatives. Now, some are great. They'll tell you exactly who they're targeting. But from having the conversation with some of the directors, they want just everybody to be applying. Right? They tend to be open, and the restrictions are really not there. The certificates tend to be more focused. The graduates, right, the PhD, those who are master's level and beyond. But the openness, I think, of this, especially in the workshop stage, makes sense for that to be like that. So we ended up developing a dashboard because we didn't want these things to just be stale and be locked away in a PDF report somewhere with great figures. We wanted to give people the flexibility and power to look at the database themselves and ask questions that they have in mind themselves. So this is the dashboard, if you haven't seen it yet. And all these things nuggets I've shown you right now, you can go in there and be able to filter across all different modalities, whether it's you're curious about where they're based or who their target audiences are. It's designed for you it's responsive, so all the figures update as you click through the different components on the dashboard. We use the Looker, if those of you are curious, we use the Looker platform that Google has to try and visualize these components. And that work is ongoing. So we launched it back in November of last year, and we've been adding, I've been adding these initiatives on the back end of it and trying to capture, and there's a way for people to submit trainings that then we can review and add as well. So, and then at the bottom there, bottom right, which I'll tell you about, we've been talking to the various stakeholders in the space as well to get deeper insight into the landscape, because there's one thing to look at the website, but talking to them is a whole different dimension as well. So this is what I mean. So we are talking to people, these are directors of training programs, and it's been very insightful. So we have an active series. The Lasker Foundation and Research America came back on the second year to help me do these, right? Go on site and talk to the different directors. And here's a snippet I just wanted to play you in talking with UC Irvine certificate program in science policy and advocacy for STEM scientists. So this is one of the students who participate in the program, and here's what she told me.
And you really learn the gap between the implementation of all the state-of-the-art science and research that we do have, that's being published, that's being produced, and how we apply it and actually use it to make the world better. And I noticed that gap as I got closer and closer to figuring out, okay, what do I want to do with the skill set that I've developed, you know, in the course of a PhD, you really learn how to solve problems. And I just realized that there were some really big problems that needed solving in the implementation of, you know, the work of our brightest minds. So science policy was a really beautiful transition for me into that world. And it's not very well known. Nobody in my department knows what I'm doing. I actually had to take, I think, 20 minutes to explain to my thesis committee what I'm actually hoping to do with my degree, because it's such an alternate path. But there
and so much more, right? And it's those insights that you can't get that as you talk to people. So I encourage you to check out the report and the dashboard. There's so much more to it. The launch video for the landscape is also available online if you want to take a read, where we go into a little bit more detail on some of the findings, especially on the content specifically. We did parse out the content, and there's a nice visual figure where you can actually sort through, you know, the different skill sets that different programs are trying to train the students on, and then you can look at which programs are doing what. At least I attempted to do that on that. So other projects in the lab over the years that we've had, this was an intern in the summer that came in and wanted to look at the structure of human narratives in science, in the Journal of Stories in Science. And so this was a fun project that she got to work on, and mapping the work in terms, there's a lot of storytelling, right? Human storytelling in science. So she looked at the various initiatives, science communication initiatives, and the level of access to written stories. And so that was a really great project. It's available in bioRxiv if you want to take a read. Another one, we had a intern from Mexico that was really curious about pop-up science museums in Mexico. And so she visualized them like in real time, because there's a lot of publicly available data about the existence of these science museums in Mexico. So she was like, I want to look at how they evolve over time. And was surprised to find actually there's a lot of them are born and dying very, very quickly because of lack of funding that is there. And and she came up with that project. I didn't know that, for example, that this data set existed in the first place. So it's that kind of I just love that when people come in with their own questions and try to examine the landscape. Heidi came on board the lab a couple of years back, and we were just discussing many projects, but one of them came to mind looking at the AZEL. So I'm sure most of you know about the AZEL funding program, NSF AZEL, the biggest basically funder of informal science education, science communication, all these things. And so she looked at the funding database between 06 and 21 and tried to map different components, the organizations being funded, the faculty, you know, co-PI versus single PIs. And so we published that in bioRxiv preprint. You can easily access it. And that led to just a whole slew of other projects that we're now doing. And one of them, Bernadette Weigman, has been leading, looking more deeply into neuroscience and society. So the Dana Foundation has jumped on this right now, just for you to know, for those of you curious, looking at neuroscience and society. And they have a very, very big focus on this. And check this out, this figure here, looking at the number of grants that have awarded and against since 2019. Notice that little peak there in 22, right? So they're doubling down in this space. And so there's a lot of activities that's taking place. And we had a chance to talk, Bernadette directly talked to the president, Caroline Montoyo, and got some insight about how they're thinking about this and the projects that they're supporting. And if you look at actually what they're supporting, it's just amazing. You know, the projects overlap quite a bit with ASL, with the Sloan Foundation, right? And others that are in this space as well. So these two pieces here, I'll also share the links for you to take a read in a little bit. And this is what I mean. So the funding landscape is huge, and it is connected to the training as well, because they do fund trainings, and there's a lot of that is taking place too. And this is just a snippet of the over 150 organizations that we have mapped since Heidi. When Heidi came on, we just looked at AZEL, and then she left, but then the work has continued to map all these other ones as well. And so we put them together on a dashboard as well. So we love dashboards. That's one thing. We love dashboards. And so we have an ongoing mapping of the funding organizations that are doing this work, funding all types of projects, which is really, really cool. And we have now advanced it even further to looking at the individual grants that funders are supporting, which is really hard to do because the information available is usually parsed very differently by each organization. So the one that's really comprehensive is the AZEL program. The NSF AZEL has a lot of these programs, funded grants that you can look at in the past, how much they were for, what they were for, who got it, where was it based, right? So this dashboard attempts to try to bring it all together and visualize, right? And almost like a stock market, if you look at the amounts given per year and you can see, okay, whoops, what's happening, in the 2020, just look at that little dip there, number and in the amounts. So you can do a sanity check to see what's going on in the landscape. And there's about 1,300 grants that you can sort of parse through and look as well, all in one place. So doing this work, right, the civic science journalism, we're mapping these things, we're sharing them all on our lab website, which I'll share also. So you can, as we're talking to different stakeholders, we're learning so much from just one conversation, 30-minute conversation, and we're doing it at scale where we are going on the ground. We've gone as far as Bogota, Colombia. Jake, who's on the call, is based in DC, so he's always roaming around from time to time to talk to stakeholders directly as well to gain insights about what they're learning. And this is the key question from our work is what are you learning from your work, right? Are you a scholar? You just published a paper. What was the key insight? What was actionable from that work? And in my conversation with the training directors for the landscape, it's the same set of questions I'm asking. What are you learning? And I'll share the link to that series. We have about almost 10 conversations that you can read through. They're 30, 40 minutes, and I am relentless in asking them really hard questions about what are you learning, why that, why not this, and so forth. But one of my joys in doing this work has been the insights we're learning from the lab ended up basically creating this collective, the Sai Resident Collective, because we realized we would like to also support those who are doing this work, emerging scholars and practitioners, and providing them with the support that they need, professional development in particular. A lot of times they want to, I think some of you can relate to this. You want to go to a conference, you want to meet people, right? And tell you what, all that costs money, right? And you're looking for those advice and so forth. So creating the Sai Resident Collective has been a joy, and it continues today. All the insights we're learning from the lab, they are the first ones to know about it, and so it's been a lot of fun. And now it's available for everybody in the public as well. And then at Northeastern, it's also been exciting to develop this new community, the public engagement with Science Hub. And it's been a joy, right? This is Bruce Lewinstein, who was our inaugural speaker back in April. And we've been having Matt Nisbet as well here on the left. And we've been having engagements every month, kind of like with the SciCommers chat network as well. And you guys are an inspiration, by the way, also because it's about bringing people together, right? To share. And what you're seeing here, and I chose this image intentionally because this is exactly what I am envisioning, is that we need to have more connectivity as much as possible, because we're all learning new insights from the work we're reading, the work we're doing. And the only way to move forward is by talking with each other and brainstorming. And so I look forward to doing that. And so I want to end there and just say thanks to all these people that have made this work possible. It's still ongoing. We are continuing to develop. We just got a new grant from the Rita Allen Foundation to continue our mapping, and we're always seeking new partners. And I will share last nugget, the lab exchange, which is a Harvard initiative that some of you may know about. We're really excited to partner with them because they saw the potential of all the insights we're gathering together, especially the conversations we're having with stakeholders, in being in having educational value, right? So lab exchange is, they call it the world's science classroom. There are a lot of educators on there, and they have added a category around civic science, right? And so it's just really exciting to have that component. And so now everything we're publishing on our network that we're growing, called the Civic Science TV network, which I did not talk about, but I'm happy to tell you more in the Q&A. All those insights are now being integrated into Lab Exchange. So that was a quick overview of all the stuff that we're doing. And I'm sorry that was super fast, but I am hoping I've given you a little bit of insight to give me some questions. So Tyler, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Fanuel. At this time, I will open up the floor for questions. You can just ask them out loud. And if you are not comfortable asking out loud, you can always put your question in the chat and I will ask them out loud. But I want to give someone else before I start talking an opportunity.
Well, while we still have the screen up, Fanuel, I had one really quick one on your first slide. On your first slide with and I see Alberto's hand up, but I promise Alberto, this is a quick one. Not the first, okay, it's the one with your unpublished map.
Oh yeah, here it is.
So there is an interesting gray space there with question marks on it, kind of S-shaped. What is going on there?
Yeah, like in the center, right? This one?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So my training is a neuroscientist, right? Spent a lot of time looking at microscopes as well. It was my attempt to say if there are these unknown things that are developing, right, in between spaces that we just don't know about at this time, right? So actually, I should put way more questions. So it was my attempt to say, as we're all doing this work, new things are emerging that we don't have labels on right now, like no good way to describe. And so for me, I just put a question mark and leave it at that, and then get questions like this, because I'm curious when I talk to people and I'm really listening to say, is there something that I've not heard about, right? Reading a paper and like, ooh, I didn't think of it that way. Interesting. And yeah,
awesome.
It was my attempt to do that. I should totally publish this, by the way, but it's
yeah, it's cool.
And I drew it, by the way, fun fact, 2015.
No kidding.
I've not changed it a bit since then.
Wow, cool. Thank you.
I see Alberto.
It is fantastic work. Thank you for the presentation. I've got a couple of questions.
Yes.
But first, though, I'm curious, what is the dashboard's plans for monitoring the sort of longevity of activities? Because I know in the almost 20 years I've been sort of watching these things, some events or some organizations have already come and gone, sort of Science Online, SciComm Camp, potentially now the Science Communication Training Network. So is there a filter, or will you keep public information about organizations or events that have left?
Yeah, exactly. So there's a filter on there exactly with that. Is it selective or not? So you can do that filtering that is there. The way we learn about that.
What do you see then about the lifetime of these events? Not the university ones, but the
So it's we don't have a time tracker to say how long it was active. The question was, are you active right now, right? But your question, I love your question to say, okay, how long, if you were deactivated, how long were you active for? That was much harder to discern, because a lot of what we were using was publicly available. So programs don't do that. They just either wrap up their runs. There are some programs that were multiple years, upwards of 10 years, and shut down the doors for whatever reason. Funding usually is the culprit that does programs in the end. But we don't have enough. I don't have enough information to tell you, oh, is there a pattern about program X and sooner versus another? But if I was to pick out a culprit, funding usually wraps things up, and from personal experience as well, having developed a program and closed the program, we finished it because of funding.
Yes, and then a related question is, I've noticed more sort of formally SciComm described activities outside of the US. And I just don't know if that's just my bias or if there is very distinct geographic differences. So your maps mostly we're seeing showing US, but
Yeah.
globally, do you see differences?
No, so not differences, terminology. So going back to that, yes, people just use different terminologies for the same thing. And so our map focused heavily on the US because we had to just start somewhere. Starting with the whole world would have been just a little bit too much. We are now adding things around the world. There are pockets of activity. So US is leading by far. The UK is right there as well, South Africa. So there's activity down there as well. Nigeria, a few things, and Asia, India, Australia, a little bit as well. So, but by far, US has the most sort of initiative. There was a paper that came out in JCOM recently, Journal of Science Communication, that looked at certificate programs and across different countries and you would see dots. And again, terminology is what separates them. Terminology is what really creates the differences, but the actions are mostly overlapping. Okay, so Brianne, I think, is next.
Oh, yeah, Renee.
Renee, hi.
No worries. Hi, great talk. I was actually just curious about learning more about the founder track for sort of the residents for the collective. If you could just talk more about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we started this again because of what we were noticing on the ground, the work that we were doing the civic science journalism, that the individuals doing the work needed more support, right? And so beyond just training, like continued support in terms of professional development. So we created a Sai Resident Collective to be the space to support them. So the Simons Foundation thought this was a good idea and gave us some funding to create this safe space. And so we created two tracks. The founder track are people who are designing or have designed initiatives that are like civic science, science communication, participatory science initiatives. And so they are part of the community that are, and the goal there for them is to develop, like continue to develop these initiatives, give them the time and space to think about them. So when we had the Simons Foundation grant, we were able to give people a couple $1,000s, right, to use at their discretion, basically, to continue to grow their initiatives. And a lot of times it was professional development that they used it for. You know, conferences, you want to bring people together to meet, to learn from each other in your local area, because the founder, since we're mostly virtually based, people can sign up from wherever they're localized, right? We have people in California, Tennessee, Chicago area, whatever. So I always tell them, hey, what do you, in fact, one of the residents is here, Martina, bottom there is here also. And she's based in Maryland, Baltimore specifically. So yeah, so that's the track, Brianne. And then the other one is the scholars track. So another aspect of this is people who want to study this space. And there's a growing group of those people as well. And so one example is Ariana Zuanazi, and so she's all about the connection between scientists and artists, and looking at the collaboration. So she's like studying that space specifically. I thought that was cool.
Thanks so much.
And there are about 25 residents, just for you to know. Fun fact, 25. And for everybody, I put the links, some of the links in the chat there. You can take a look later. All the things I've mentioned, most things. And if I've forgotten something, I will add it as we're talking.
Thanks, Fanuel. I know Tyler probably has questions too, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about Lab Exchange and what's going forward. You kind of ended on that, and I was curious.
Yeah. So labexchange.org is the website if you want to take a look. So that is a partnership. They're based at Harvard, and so they have this big collection of database that essentially is like this massive MOOC that is there. And students and educators can design what they're called learning pathways by utilizing different resources from different places. So Lab Exchange is this big aggregator where they're bringing together and they filter them very carefully to whether it's in biology, chemistry, different trainings, educational material, right? Biology focused. And so we partner with them just to focus on science and civic science more broadly. They liked what we were doing with our questions that we were asking about the lessons being learned on the ground. And so they're now including that as part of these learning pathways that educators could use in, for example, training or providing context for high school students who may be interested about civic science, right? There's been some discussion about, can we get to students earlier, right? Versus waiting until they're in undergrad or grad school to start talking about civic science and everything that's inside it. So the work we're doing is an excellent example, at least they thought. And I was happy they thought this, that they could integrate for educators to integrate into their curriculums. So our content is being integrated now. How educators use, I don't know that yet. So too early. But we're excited about that potential of accessing, millions of educators. They have about, I think the user base is 7 million or something.
Wow, cool.
Around the world. And so, we have a little tiny little pocket that is in there.
Thanks a million.
Yeah. And I'll put the link in there. So. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I switched screens and I forgot that I should look at who's next. Ananya. Hopefully I said that right.
Hi. Such a beautiful talk. I actually did not know anything about civic science, but I think this was a great primer because I was trying to look at it, but definitely hearing it from someone who practices it is amazing. My question was mostly on how do you think is the training more accessible to everyone? Because one thing that I keep coming across with my interest in science communication or education is these courseworks or fellowships can be extremely competitive, and it's kind of the chicken and egg problem where they want you already to do something to show the interest, but also some of it could be an accessibility issue where someone may not have all the resources to practice it, and that's why they are approaching a fellowship or a program. So I just wanted to know your thoughts about it.
Yeah. So I want to put a paper that I actually encourage you all to take a look. Is by Bruce Lewinstein. It's titled "How Should We Organize Science Communication Training to Achieve Competencies?" The link is in the chat. Really cool read. He's trying to visualize or encapsulate how the training landscape has evolved over time. But with your question, Ananya, am I saying it right, Ananya? Great. I believe there's something for everybody, and I think that's what makes the ecosystem really cool. So that's a blessing and a curse, because you as a student then needs to navigate that to figure out, okay, what's accessible for me, right? Do I need a workshop? Do I want a degree, right? Do I want a certificate? And so the dashboard baby could be of use to you, actually, because you can go in there and just type your keyword of things that you're curious about, right? Maybe more science policy, or you want to do more participatory science, for example, right? Citizen science. You can just go in there and type that, and you see what initiatives show up and the modality of which they're designed around, right? Maybe it's just a certificate, maybe it's a workshop, maybe it's a course. There are a lot of courses, actually, tons and tons of courses that are available, and they're popping up left and right. And I don't think so. Our dashboard doesn't capture everything. Let me just be very clear. It's impossible to do that. Impossible. In fact, I ended up learning about the BU certificate in civic science right earlier on, Mariette, much earlier on. And so there is something for everybody. And so it's up to you to figure out, okay, what are the skills that I want to develop? And then where are those opportunities, right? Some programs you have to pay for. And I think I tried to I think there's a category in there where you can try to filter that, but it's not clear for some of them. And for some of those that are located at a university within a university, if you're outside it, you're locked away from being able to participate, right? So for those who are looking for trainings, it can be a challenge, right? Because you have to navigate this yourself. And new trainings are popping up left and right as well. we try to capture what we can, but it's impossible to do that. Some trainings are available at conferences as well. So the Science Talk is a conference that takes place with the Association for Science Communicators. They have trainings and workshops during the conference. But guess what? You need to have, it's available both online and in person. But if you can't go there, going there in person is really cool, but it requires funding. And they do provide some scholarships. Some do, some don't. So you as a navigator, you kind of have to figure that part out, right? So the dashboard maybe can help a little bit on that search as well. So, and I will say that the search function, the open word keyword search, the back end of it, it's looking at all the program descriptions that are publicly available already. So programs use various terminology, so you can just go in there, try to type different keywords and see what pops up, right? And then you can make decisions from that about, okay, this is available now. One thing that we don't have on the dashboard is, and this is hard because some programs do shut down, and it's hard for us to know if they do because we don't have like an active radar that's scanning everything in real time. Someone needs to tell us, close doors. and the manpower, woman power to do that continuously is just not available, right? Not possible. But it's and I'm hoping that this dashboard continues to live for a couple of years, right? Until we continue to develop it and advance it. But hopefully that answers your questions a little bit, Ananya. And I will say, and I'm sorry for talking for so long, there is a lot of available initiatives within a university, and a lot of students don't know that. Okay, so within a given university, at times, the left hand is not talking to the right hand. So
yeah, I mean, I would agree. Yeah.
That makes it hard, right? If you're in the College
Yeah.
of Arts, Media and Design, and people in the STEM, they're not talking to each other. So, and they're designing programs that are kind of in the same realm around public engagement.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your answer.
Yeah, I do have a question. And we are running up on time, so if you have to
Great.
answer shortly, then that's okay. But I was thinking of when you were talking about the research that some of the collective members were doing, how were they sort of quantifying the impact of civic science engagement?
So you're talking about the training, or?
I think I'm talking about the training.
Yeah, so it's hard. So evaluation is the #1 challenge probably for most programs. And they cite that, and in my conversations, it's a continued, like it's a topic that keeps coming up. That is, hey, we would love to do this, but we need like funding to do it properly, right? Because it's a lot of it's a low capacity that we may not have at the moment. And this has been the same thing, previous reports that had looked at this, they're finding the same component. And it shows up on our landscape by way of that most programs don't really talk about it as much on their websites, right? And so it's not that maybe they're not doing it, but that's the capacity issue shows up there as well. And so when we were scanning our these programs, we were looking at, okay, how are you talking about impact? And it's in diverse ways, or in terms of if they're listing it, because most do not. Most do not. A lot of times it's anecdotal testimonials that they share on their website. Testimonials are very popular in terms of, hey, I learned something that I didn't learn, blah, blah, blah. Now, when you get into quantifying this, that becomes a little bit more scarce. Some have published some papers around this, try to say, okay, pre this, post that, right? So there's a little bit of that, but that's a very tall order to say all programs should do that or are doing that. It's just a capacity issue. And then careers, where are with some certificates, those especially targeted towards professionals, they tend to have that publicly, like they are very clear and say, hey, look, our people are getting jobs in these spaces. X and X% are here versus there. Right. And so that's an advertising thing, right? To say, oh, I should come here because the job prospects are great. So there's that aspect, but I would love to see more, right? It's just a capacity thing in terms of how do we support these programs to be able to capture these insights, because that question, it keeps up coming in terms of, so what is the impact you're having, right, from your program? And then to take your question further, Tyler, for public engagement initiatives now, not training, the actual initiatives, what is the impact there? That's a whole different question that even harder to dissect, but we should be trying to capture. And of course, there's a ton of literature trying to capture those as well, but there's a lot we just don't know, or not being captured, actually.
Thank you, Fanuel. We may have time for one more quick question.
And I should put I'm going to put the playlist, the series we're doing around with the directors of training programs, that's on Research America. And as people ask the last question, I will find that.
And if no one has a last question, I will let everyone know. Thank you for coming to our mentor chat. Everyone who could attend live. This is recorded, and we will post this for you to maybe rewatch again, or to share with a friend who wasn't able to come. All of the links and resources that were shared in the chat, I will also share with you all in Slack. We do have another mentor chat coming up. We're going to sort of round out this theme on like priming for communication in September, where we will be talking about strategic science communication with Anthony Dedeaux. And then we will move on to sort of talking about engagement in October with a mentor chat about AI in public policy. So I'm very excited for that. You all will get the updates so you can have all of the newest and the latest Zoom links for your calendar needs. And I would just like to thank everyone again. And that is the end of our mentor chat.
Thank you all, and please join us in our network. We are always actively talking to so many people. It's almost becoming a live thing, almost.